So editing can be a little bit of a tricky subject. I've used a lot of different options with varying results. We'll kind of do a run through of the different kinds of editing, and then I can share some of my experiences with editing. There are different types of editing, so you should familiarize yourself with those. So whenever you're asking for quotes, you know exactly what is being included in that quote of business. You can do developmental editing, which is kind of, I would say, kind of a first step in the process, especially if you're newer to crafting storylines. Developmental editing is more on detailed feedback of the manuscript. They can help you refine ideas, maybe that weren't very clear in the manuscript, help you shape your narrative, identify and help fix any glaring plot holes or any character inconsistencies in the story. So it's not really looking at the context and the grammar that's associated with the work, but more of the story and if all the story elements are there and available. You can also do an editorial report, which is basically a critique of everything. And they would give you suggestions on things that they would change to improve on your manuscript. You can do an annotated manuscript in which they'll actually mark up the manuscript and point specific places out where you can make improvements. You can do structural editing. Structural editing is exactly as it implies, to improve the overall structure of your prose to keep your reader engaged. They look at chapters and section breaks, pacing, content you may want to add or delete, expanding or tightening your structure. So these are more, those two, developmental and structural editing, are a lot of the pieces of your story that are being reviewed. You can also do copy editing. Copy editing helps you to create a readable version of your manuscript, improving the clarity of your prose, any coherency, consistency issues, correct filling gaps between what your intent is as an author and what the reader's actually perceiving and understanding. So if you're not doing a good job of explaining things, you may need to tighten that prose up a little bit to make your message clearer. That is what copy editing implies. Line editing is oftentimes confused with copy editing, but they are a little bit different. Line editing kind of focuses on the content and flow of your prose, and it's kind of a stylistic editing. It centers around the style rather than the manuscript, the mechanics of the manuscript. It's kind of like copy editing, but it's a little bit more precise and a little bit more customized to your author's style of writing. It looks like at things like word usage, point of view and tense, descriptive inconsistencies, with more detailed suggestion to strengthen the actual prose of the manuscript. And then you have the basic proofreading. Proofreading is looking for any of those spelling and grammatical errors, inconsistency in spelling and style, inconsistency in layout and typography, confusing or awkward pages and word breaks, incorrect captioning on any illustrations, page numbers, content, etc. It is just kind of a purely grammatical mechanics type of review. Those all vary in price. Obviously, you're more detailed, like the structural, the developmental editing tends to be a little bit more pricey. You can visit the website, and I put average breakdowns. Now, I don't know, it's been at least a year since I've looked up averages, and with inflation, I don't know if the cost of these editing has gone up, but you'll have to check it out. Proofreading is obviously the lowest cost. So what have I done for my work? editing is important. I try to do the best that I can. I've hired an editor for $2,000 to do kind of a combination of developmental editing and line editing. And the $2,000 still had several glaring typos and grammatical mistakes that readers would point out to me. I have hired editors on Fiverr before. I had one that did a fantastic job, and then the next time I went around, he wasn't available, so I used somebody different. I actually had 2 editors flake out on me. I gave them several weeks to complete the assignment, which was, it was their timeline that they decided. Both of them asked for extensions, which I granted, and then both of them flaked out at the end of the extension and said, sorry, I can't deliver. You know, obviously they didn't get paid for that. I think the most frustrating thing was that Fiverr had no way for me to offer a review on these editors without them actually completing the service, which was frustrating, because what if other authors then hire these editors who then flake out and don't do the job? Now you might argue, well, you didn't pay for it. Yeah, but it was almost 2 months of waiting on a piece of work that could have been published and generating income. Instead, I was waiting on people who waited until the last minute to ask for an extension, and then when the extension was granted, I think one of them I even granted 2 extensions, and then they canceled on me. It was very frustrating. It left a very sour taste in my mouth. So I've spent a lot of money, and I've spent an average amount of money, and then I've spent no money and just done self-editing. And in any one of those works that you choose, there will be mistakes, whether they are, grammatical or spelling errors or whatever. They're still going to be there. I do try to use several run-throughs, and I utilize Pro Writing Aid, which is a fantastic tool, but it doesn't catch everything. But it does a pretty darn good job of pointing out things. So, you just kind of have to decide what's best for you and what you want. Now, I do self-publishing, so I have to do the editing myself. If you are trying to go a traditional route and obtain a literary agent, which we'll talk about later, you don't have to typically pay for an editor, but you want your work to be clean. So you need to find a way to get it as clean as possible to submit that manuscript. Traditional publishing will essentially hire somebody to edit your work for you and do that job. So I guess it just depends on which way you're going to go. It is really important. It's an important step in the process. A lot of times I do have beta readers. They catch a lot of the more glaring typos and grammatical errors, but I still find them. I actually went back and went through all of my books again and read them, found things, cleaned it up, did a second version. I think it's just something that always happens to authors. We want our work to be perfect. We really do try, but it is very difficult sometimes whenever you are reading and editing your own work that you know what that sentence is supposed to say. I can't tell you how many times I've had a beta reader say, well, on page such and such, on line da-da-da, there's this error. And I will go and read that sentence and I'll be like, that's not an error. So I'm like, okay, wait. Go by it word by word. Oh, crap, there it is. Like, I know in my head what that line is supposed to say, and my brain is filling in the blank there. But to a reader, it definitely stands out a lot more. So I think one of the things you have to realize as an author is, we are human beings who will make mistakes. We don't intentionally do so or want to publish work that has any kind of errors in it, but it does happen from time to time. I do encourage readers, a lot of people are like, I don't know if you want to know about this, but XYZ, there's an error, I do. I mean, it does hurt to hear that because I try so hard, but then at the same time, yes, please forward that information on to me so that I can make the corrections, and then in further versions of the book, I can clean all of that up. So I do go back and refer to those notes and make those corrections. The other thing I do notice is that sometimes people say, well, that's a grammatical correction, or, that's an error. I go back and I do look at it, and it's not necessarily a grammatical error. It is more in the author voice. It's how I want to say it. Might not be 100% grammatically correct, especially with things like dialogue. People don't talk grammatically correct. It sounds awkward. People don't do it. It's not realistic. And so, yes, there is a certain type of voice that comes across in the prose. And so sometimes people will say, well, this is an error. And I will read it and say, no, that's exactly how I meant that to sound. That is your author voice. There's a little bit of a difference there on some of those. So people tend to nitpick at those things. Well, that wasn't how you should properly say that, or that isn't how you should properly word that. That may be the case, but it just doesn't make sense to most people to read it that way. It sounds awkward. So, just to make your dialogue more realistic, sometimes you have to break the grammar cardinal rules. So keep all those things in mind whenever you're editing. So I guess that's my 2 cents on editing.